You wake up not feeling it. So you skip the gym, you delay the work, you push the call, you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. That's your entire life right there. Controlled by a feeling, a tiny chemical fluctuation in your weak little brain. And you have the audacity to say you want power? If your actions depend on motivation, you're already finished. You've been sold a lie. That motivation is fuel. That you need to feel inspired before you move. That's garbage. Motivation is a spark. It flashes. It dies. Discipline is a furnace. It burns whether you feel good, bad, tired, bored, heartbroken, or sick. When you rely only on motivation, you build your life on a mood swing. And moods are for children. Let me make this uncomfortable for you. The men you admire, the killers in business, in sport, in war, they don't wait to feel ready. They operate on command. They decide, and it's done. You, on the other hand, negotiate with yourself. Maybe later. I'll start Monday. That negotiation is weakness talking. And weakness always wins if you let it speak. You want to understand real transformation? It's like speaking in tongues. Not religious nonsense. I'm talking about identity. When a man steps into a higher version of himself, he speaks a different language. The language of standards. The language of non-negotiables. The language of execution. Average men can't even understand it. They hear discipline and think punishment. They hear sacrifice and think suffering. They hear control and think restriction. That's because they're fluent in excuses. When you rely on motivation, you're still speaking the language of comfort. I'll work when I feel inspired. I'll train when I'm in the mood. That's the dialect of the weak. A powerful man speaks in actions. He doesn't explain himself to his emotions. He commands them. His body is a soldier. His mind is a general. And when the order is given, there is no debate. Most of you don't have a motivation problem. You have an identity problem. You still see yourself as the guy who sometimes tries, the guy who wants to improve. That's pathetic. You either are disciplined or you're not. You either execute or you don't. There's no in between. When your identity shifts, your behavior follows automatically. You don't need hype music. You don't need a podcast to pump you up. You move because that's who you are. Let's be brutally clear. Motivation makes you start. Discipline makes you unstoppable. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation is reactive. Discipline is controlled aggression directed at your goals every single day. If you rely only on motivation, you will always be inconsistent. And inconsistency is the trademark of losers. Control is power. If you cannot control your impulses, your schedule, your sleep, your diet, your habits, you do not deserve influence over anything bigger. You want money, you want status, you want dominance. Start by dominating yourself. Wake up when you said you would. Train when you don't want to. Work when it's boring. Execute when you're tired. That's how you rewire your brain. That's how you start speaking the language of winners. Here's the hidden truth nobody tells you. Motivation feels good because it doesn't demand commitment. It gives you the illusion of progress without forcing you to change. You watch a video, you feel fired up, you imagine a better life. Then you do nothing. That hit of inspiration becomes your addiction. You're not chasing success. You're chasing the feeling of almost becoming successful. And that's why most men stay average. You're addicted to the spark. Terrified of the grind. They want the emotion of victory without the monotony of preparation. They want the highlight reel without the repetition. But power is built in silence, in routine, in brutal consistency when nobody is clapping. If you want dominance, stop asking yourself how you feel. Ask yourself what needs to be done. Feelings are temporary. Standards are permanent. The man who wins is the man who executes regardless of weather, mood, or chaos. He doesn't rise to the level of his motivation. He falls to the level of his systems. So here's your reality check. If you rely only on motivation, you will live an unpredictable, average, fragile life. You will start strong and finish weak. You will talk big and deliver small. And deep down, you'll know it's your fault. You say you're waiting for the right moment, the right energy, the right mindset. That's the first mistake. The moment you tie your actions to a feeling, you hand control of your life to something unstable. Feelings shift by the hour. Discipline does not. You don't need to feel ready. You need to decide. There's a massive difference. Most men are addicted to the rush of inspiration. They scroll, they watch, they listen to speeches, and for a few minutes they feel unstoppable. Their chest tightens. Their mind races. They picture the future version of themselves. And then the feeling fades. When it fades, so does their ambition. That's not ambition. That's emotional dependency. If your output is tied to motivation, your productivity becomes unpredictable. Some days you're on fire. Other days you disappear. That inconsistency destroys trust. Trust in yourself and trust from others. You become the man who has potential but never delivers. The man who talks big when excited and goes silent when bored. Potential without consistency is useless. Look at your own patterns. How many goals have you started with intensity and abandoned when the excitement disappeared? The gym membership, the business idea, the new routine. You weren't lacking intelligence. You weren't lacking opportunity. You were lacking structure. You were relying on emotion to carry you through a process that requires stability. Here's the brutal truth. Motivation feels powerful because it gives you the illusion of strength without demanding commitment. It's comfortable. It lets you believe you're changing without actually changing. You get the dopamine hit of imagining success, but you avoid the discomfort of building it. That gap between imagination and execution is where most men waste years. Real power is cold. Doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't check your mood. It operates on command. When the alarm rings, you move. When the work needs to be done, you sit down and execute. Not because you're inspired, because you said you would. That level of self-respect is rare, and that rarity is what creates separation. The world does not reward bursts of enthusiasm. It rewards reliability in business, in fitness, in leadership. The man who shows up every day wins, not the man who shows up only when he's emotionally charged. Motivation is volatile. Discipline is stable. Volatility creates chaos. Stability builds empires. Ask yourself a direct question. If you remove motivation from the equation completely, would you still execute? If the answer is no, then your system is broken. You don't have a work ethic. You have a mood-based routine, and moods are influenced by sleep, stress, weather, relationships, social media, variables you don't fully control. Why would you tie your future to something so fragile? When you rely on motivation, you also train your brain to avoid discomfort. The second a task feels boring or difficult, your mind searches for a reason to delay it. I'm not in the right headspace. I'll do it later. That pattern compounds. Delay becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. Suddenly, you're the kind of man who postpones everything that matters. High performers don't eliminate emotion, they override it. They build systems that function regardless of internal noise. Calendars, routines, non-negotiable standards. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They ask, is it scheduled? That shift sounds simple, but it changes everything. It removes debate. It removes drama. It removes excuses. Depending on motivation is comfortable because it keeps responsibility blurred. If you fail, you blame the lack of inspiration. If you quit, you blame the loss of excitement. But when you operate from discipline, there's nowhere to hide. You either executed or you didn't. That level of accountability forces growth. You don't need more hype. You need fewer negotiations with yourself. The men who dominate their industries are not permanently inspired. They are permanently committed. Commitment outlives emotion. Commitment survives boredom. Commitment survives setbacks. If your actions only happen when you feel driven, then you are not in control. And if you are not in control of yourself, you will never control anything greater than yourself. Most people misunderstand discipline because they've only experienced it as restriction. They think it's about forcing yourself into a miserable routine, stripping away enjoyment, living a rigid life with no freedom. That's a childish interpretation. Discipline is not a cage. It's a weapon. And if you don't learn how to use it, you'll spend your life at the mercy of people who do. Freedom without control is chaos. You say you want freedom, financial freedom, time freedom, freedom to move how you want. But you refuse the one thing that makes freedom possible. Structure. Discipline is structure. It's the framework that turns ambition into measurable progress. Without it, your goals remain abstract fantasies. Look at how most men operate. They wake up based on how tired they feel. They eat based on cravings. They work based on urgency. They train based on mood. That's not independence, that's reaction. They are reacting to impulses all day long and calling it living. Discipline flips that dynamic. You act based on decisions made in a calm, strategic state, not on temporary urges. Discipline is proof of internal authority. It means you can give yourself an order and follow it without external pressure. No boss watching. No audience clapping, no fear of embarrassment. Just you and your word. And if your word to yourself means nothing, understand this clearly. Your confidence is built on sand. People avoid discipline because it exposes them. When you commit to a strict routine, you remove excuses. If you fail, it's visible, it's measurable. That's uncomfortable. It's easier to stay vague. I'll try to eat better. I'll try to be more productive. Vague goals protect the ego. Discipline removes that protection and demands performance. There's another layer most men never grasp. Discipline is energy management. When your habits are automated, you reduce decision fatigue. You don't waste mental power debating every small action. You wake up at the same time. You train at the same time. You work in defined blocks. Your brain is free to focus on high-level thinking instead of trivial choices. That's not restriction. That's optimization. You want power? Power requires reliability. If people cannot predict your standards, they cannot trust you with responsibility. In business, the disciplined man becomes valuable because he is stable. He delivers on time. He meets targets. He maintains composure under pressure. That stability attracts opportunity. Emotional volatility repels it. The gym is a simple example. When you train only when motivated, progress stalls. When you train on schedule, regardless of emotion, strength increases. The same principle applies to wealth, skill development, networking, leadership. Repetition under structure compounds. Sporadic effort resets the clock every time. Discipline also builds psychological resilience. Every time you execute while tired, bored, or stressed, you strengthen your tolerance for discomfort. Discomfort stops being a threat and becomes normal. That shift is critical. The world is competitive. Pressure is guaranteed. If minor inconvenience throws you off, you're not prepared for serious challenges. There's a misconception that disciplined people lack joy. In reality, they experience deeper satisfaction because their progress is earned. They respect themselves. Self-respect is not built by comfort. It's built by promises kept. When you say you'll do something and you follow through, your identity solidifies. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You see yourself as someone who executes. Discipline is also a filter. It automatically eliminates low-value behaviors. Late night scrolling, random distractions, impulsive spending, overindulgence. Not because someone forced you, but because they no longer align with your standards. Your time becomes too valuable. Your focus becomes too sharp. The uncomfortable reality is that most men avoid discipline because it removes the illusion of effort. They prefer talking about goals to building systems. They prefer intensity over consistency. But intensity fades, structure remains. When discipline becomes non-negotiable, you stop bargaining with weakness. You don't need external validation. You don't need constant encouragement. Your progress becomes predictable because your behavior is predictable. That predictability is power. Discipline is not punishment. It is self-governance. It is the ability to direct your life instead of drifting through it. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop seeing structure as something imposed on you and start seeing it as something you wield. You don't behave your way into a new identity. You decide your identity, and your behavior follows. That's the part most men get backwards. They think if they stack enough good days together, they'll eventually become disciplined, confident, powerful. No, you become those things the moment you decide that's who you are. Everything else is alignment. Right now, you're acting in accordance with the story you tell yourself. If your internal narrative is, I'm trying to improve, your actions will reflect hesitation. If your narrative is, I'm not naturally consistent, you'll unconsciously prove it. Identity drives behavior at a level deeper than motivation ever could. You don't rise to your goals. You fold to your self-image. Look at the evidence in your own life. When you identify as someone who doesn't miss workouts, skipping the gym feels wrong. When you identify as someone who values excellence, submitting average work feels uncomfortable. But if you identify as someone who's working on it, you give yourself permission to fail. The standards you tolerate are tied directly to who you believe you are. Most men are stuck because they're negotiating with an outdated identity. They still see themselves as the guy who procrastinates, the guy who quits when things get difficult, the guy who starts strong and fades out. So even when they attempt discipline, there's internal conflict. Their habits clash with their self-image, and the self-image usually wins. You cannot outperform your identity for long. You might have a productive week. You might even have a productive month. But if deep down you don't see yourself as disciplined, you'll sabotage progress the moment pressure increases. It's not bad luck. It's psychological alignment. Your mind pulls you back to what feels familiar. The shift happens when you stop asking, how do I stay motivated? And start asking, who am I becoming? That question forces clarity. A man who sees himself as elite does not tolerate mediocre routines. A man who sees himself as a leader does not behave like a follower. Identity compresses decision-making. When you know who you are, choices become obvious. This is why surface-level change rarely lasts. People attempt to modify habits without redefining themselves. They say, I want to wake up earlier, but they still see themselves as someone who struggles with mornings. They say, I want to be more confident, but they still see themselves as insecure. The behavior is temporary because the identity remains unchanged. You need to make a hard internal declaration, not publicly, not on social media, privately. Decide that you are the type of man who executes regardless of mood. Decide that you are disciplined. Decide that you are reliable. Once that decision is made, every action becomes a vote. Either you reinforce the identity or you weaken it. There's discomfort in this process because it removes excuses. When your identity is weak, failure feels expected. When your identity is strong, failure feels unacceptable. That tension forces growth. You don't allow yourself to slip because slipping contradicts who you are. Identity also shapes perception. When you see yourself as powerful, obstacles become challenges to overcome, not threats to avoid. When you see yourself as capable, setbacks become feedback, not proof of inadequacy. Your interpretation of events changes, and interpretation dictates response. Most men obsess over tactics, productivity apps, morning routines, time management hacks. Those tools matter, but they are secondary. Without identity alignment, tools become temporary crutches. With identity alignment, even simple systems become powerful because they're backed by conviction. If you want permanent change, stop focusing on what you need to do and focus on who you need to be. Standards become easier to maintain when they reflect your self-image. Discipline becomes automatic when it aligns with how you define yourself. Confidence becomes natural when it's rooted in repeated proof. The man who wins long-term is not the most motivated. He's the most aligned. His habits, thoughts, and standards all point in the same direction. There's no internal debate, no confusion about what he should do. His identity makes the decision before his emotions get a vote. Everyone loves the beginning. The fresh start, the surge of energy, the dramatic declaration that this time will be different. Starting is easy. It's emotional. It's exciting. It feeds the ego. Finishing is different. Finishing is quiet, repetitive, and often boring. That's where most men disappear. Inconsistency is the silent killer of potential. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as missed days, delayed tasks, broken routines. One skipped workout becomes 3. One postponed project becomes a pattern. Over time, the gap between what you say you'll do and what you actually do widens. That gap destroys credibility, especially with yourself. You cannot build strength, wealth, influence, or mastery through random bursts of effort. Success compounds, and compounding requires repetition. When your effort is inconsistent, you reset momentum repeatedly. You never stay in the game long enough for progress to multiply. Think about it clearly. A man who trains 3 times a week for 3 years will outperform the man who trains 6 times a week for 1 month and then quits. The same rule applies to business, learning, networking, leadership. Long-term stability beats short-term intensity every time. The problem is that inconsistency feels harmless in the moment. Skipping today doesn't seem catastrophic. Delaying until tomorrow feels minor. But success isn't built in dramatic leaps. It's built in daily deposits. When you skip deposits, the account never grows. There's also a psychological cost. Every time you break your word to yourself, you weaken internal trust. You start doubting your own commitments. You hesitate when setting new goals because you remember the last ones you abandoned. Confidence erodes quietly, not because you lack talent, but because your behavior is unreliable. Most men are addicted to intensity. They want to feel powerful, they want to attack a goal aggressively for a short period and then relax. That cycle feels productive, but it's unstable. Real high performers are methodical. They don't spike and crash. They maintain steady output regardless of emotion. Consistency is not glamorous. It won't get applause. Nobody celebrates the 147th day you showed up and did the work. But that's exactly why it's powerful. Because most people won't do it. They get bored, they seek novelty, They chase new strategies instead of mastering fundamentals. You don't need new tactics every week. You need to execute the same high-value actions repeatedly. When you jump from plan to plan, you lose depth. You become average at many things instead of excellent at one. Mastery demands patience with repetition. There's another uncomfortable truth. Inconsistency signals weak standards. If your commitment changes based on convenience, then convenience is your real priority. Not growth, not dominance, comfort. And comfort never produces exceptional outcomes. You need to separate how you feel from what you do. Some days you'll feel sharp and driven. Other days you'll feel tired and distracted. That variability is normal. What cannot vary is your standard. The work gets done regardless. When that rule becomes absolute, progress becomes predictable. Look at industries where precision matters. Aviation, medicine, elite athletics. There's no room for inconsistency. Systems are followed. Protocols are repeated. Performance is tracked. That level of discipline creates reliability. And reliability creates trust and results. If you want to be taken seriously by clients, by partners, by competitors, you must be stable. When people know you deliver every time, your value increases. When they're unsure whether you'll show up or disappear, your value collapses. Inconsistency keeps you average because it prevents momentum. Momentum is powerful. Once progress becomes visible, motivation often follows. But momentum only exists when actions are continuous. Break the chain too often and you're always starting from zero. The men who dominate long-term aren't superhuman. They're consistent. They do the work when it's boring. They repeat fundamentals when others search for shortcuts. They stay in the arena while others rotate in and out depending on mood. Over years, that difference becomes massive. If you want uncommon results, your effort cannot be common. And inconsistency is the most common trait in the world. You say you want power. You say you want influence, money, respect, but look at your daily behavior. You can't control when you sleep. You can't control what you eat. You can't control how long you scroll. And you think you're ready to control outcomes in the real world? That contradiction is the reason you're stuck. Power begins with self-regulation. If you cannot command your own impulses, you are not sovereign, you are reactive. Every notification pulls you, every craving directs you, every distraction owns a piece of your attention. That's not strength. That's vulnerability disguised as comfort. Self-control is not about perfection, it's about authority. When you decide to wake up at a specific time, you wake up. When you decide to train, you train. When you decide to focus for 2 uninterrupted hours, you eliminate every interference. No negotiation, no internal debate. That ability to override impulses is the foundation of high performance. Most men operate on autopilot. They eat what's convenient. They say yes to distractions. They delay difficult conversations. They avoid tasks that challenge their ego. Each small avoidance reinforces a pattern. Discomfort equals retreat. Over time, that pattern solidifies into identity. They become the man who backs down from resistance. Control reverses that dynamic. When you consistently move toward discomfort instead of away from it, your tolerance expands. Cold showers, hard workouts, focused work sessions without stimulation. These are not gimmicks. They are training grounds for discipline. Each act of voluntary discomfort strengthens your command over yourself. Look at attention. Attention is currency. If you cannot control where your attention goes, you cannot control your output. Social media, random videos, endless messaging. They fragment your focus. Fragmented focus produces shallow work produces average results produce frustration. High-level performers protect their focus aggressively. They set boundaries. They structure their environment. They remove temptations instead of relying on willpower alone. That's strategic control. They understand that environment influences behavior, so they design it intentionally. Impulse control also affects decision-making. When you act emotionally, you make short-term choices that sabotage long-term goals. Overspending for instant gratification. Reacting in anger during negotiations. Quitting a project because progress feels slow. Each impulsive decision compounds negatively. Discipline interrupts that cycle. There's a direct relationship between self-mastery and external authority. People trust those who are stable. If your emotions fluctuate wildly, if your habits are inconsistent, if your reactions are unpredictable, others will hesitate to rely on you. Leadership demands composure. Composure comes from control. You don't build control overnight, it's built through repeated micro decisions. Choosing water over soda. choosing to finish a task before checking your phone, choosing to speak calmly instead of reacting impulsively. These decisions seem small, but they accumulate. Over months and years, they shape character. Another overlooked aspect is physical control. Your body influences your mind. Poor sleep weakens discipline. Poor nutrition lowers energy. Lack of training reduces resilience. When your physiology is unstable, your mental control suffers. Mastering your body strengthens your mental authority. Excuses often mask lack of control. I was too tired. I didn't have time. I wasn't in the right headspace. These phrases signal that circumstances dictate your actions. High performers reverse that equation. Circumstances exist, but standards remain. Self-control also creates freedom. When you manage your finances responsibly, you reduce stress. When you manage your time effectively, you create space. When you manage your health consistently, you increase longevity and performance. Discipline narrows your short-term choices, but expands your long-term options. The uncomfortable reality is that many men want outcomes without ownership. They want respect without composure. They want wealth without financial discipline. They want elite physiques without nutritional control. That disconnect guarantees disappointment. If you cannot dominate your impulses, you will be dominated by them. And a man who is dominated internally will always struggle to lead externally. Control is not optional. It is the entry requirement for everything you claim to want. Your life is a reflection of what you tolerate, not what you dream about, not what you post about, what you tolerate. The moment you lower your standards, you lower your results. It's automatic. Standards are invisible lines you draw in the sand, and most men draw them too close to comfort. If you accept average effort from yourself, you will produce average outcomes. If you accept missed deadlines, weak workouts, sloppy thinking, inconsistent routines, that becomes your baseline. Over time, average starts to feel normal. And once average feels normal, excellence feels extreme. Standards are not about perfection. They are about non-negotiables. A man with high standards does not debate whether he shows up. He does not debate whether he keeps his word. He does not debate whether he completes what he starts. Those decisions were made long ago. There is no daily vote. Most people set goals without raising standards. They say they want more money, better health, stronger relationships, but they keep the same habits, the same environment, the same tolerance for distraction. That contradiction is why progress stalls. You cannot demand elite outcomes with average standards. When your standards are weak, excuses survive. It was a long day. I wasn't feeling well. I'll make up for it tomorrow. Those statements sound harmless, but they chip away at integrity. Each excuse you accept trains your mind to search for the next one. You build a mental library of reasons to underperform. High standards eliminate that pattern. When the bar is clear and firm, excuses feel embarrassing. You hold yourself accountable before anyone else needs to. You don't wait for external pressure. You create internal pressure. And that pressure sharpens you. There's a reason elite organizations emphasize standards. Military units, top-tier sports teams, high-performing companies, they define precise expectations. Attendance, preparation, execution. They don't leave performance to interpretation. Clarity creates consistency. Consistency creates dominance. On a personal level, standards define identity. If you see yourself as disciplined, you do not tolerate laziness. If you see yourself as professional, you do not tolerate sloppiness. If you see yourself as focused, you do not tolerate distraction. Your standards protect your identity. Environment also reflects standards. Look at your workspace. Is it organized or chaotic? Look at your circle. Do they challenge you or enable you? Look at your calendar. Is it structured or reactive? These details are not random. They are indicators of what you accept. Raising standards often feels uncomfortable because it forces change. You may need to distance yourself from people who normalize mediocrity. You may need to restructure your time. You may need to eliminate habits that once felt harmless. Growth always demands adjustment. The critical mistake is believing standards apply only when convenient. True standards operate under pressure. Anyone can perform well when conditions are perfect. The real test is execution when tired, stressed, or challenged. If your standards collapse under discomfort, they were never standards. They were preferences. There's also a compounding effect. When you raise one standard, others follow. Improve your sleep discipline, and your energy increases. Improve your energy, and your work improves. Improve your work, and your income increases. Small shifts at the standard level create large shifts in outcomes. People often confuse self-criticism with high standards. They are not the same. High standards are structured and forward-focused. They are about maintaining a level of performance, not attacking yourself emotionally. Emotional guilt drains energy. Clear standards direct it. When your standards are firm, decision-making becomes simpler. You don't waste time debating low-value options. You already know what aligns with your level and what does not. That clarity reduces internal conflict. If you want uncommon results, you must adopt uncommon standards, not temporarily, not when motivated, permanently. The line you draw determines the life you live. And if the line is weak, everything built on top of it will be weak as well. Or you can make a decision. Kill the version of you that waits for inspiration. Build habits that don't require emotion. Shift your identity from I'm trying to I execute. Speak the language of discipline until it becomes your native tongue, until action is automatic, until hesitation disappears. You don't need more motivation. You need more control. You need structure. You need standards so high that your excuses suffocate the moment they're born. Decide who you are. Then act like it. Every day, no debate, no drama, no waiting, because the world doesn't reward the motivated, it rewards the disciplined. And if you're not disciplined, you're replaceable.